May I speak and may we hear in the name of our living and loving God who creates us, redeems us and sustains us. Amen. Please sit down. So at last, the contents of 2 vicarages have been somehow shoehorned into one wing of the deanery. And on the face of it, all is well. There have been so many trips to the local charity shops that the staff are starting to look a bit panicked when we roll up for yet another visit. And everything's stored away in cupboards and hung on racks, and we are enjoying a very nice 2-bedroomed house in the west wing of the deanery, and we are very grateful. But if you wander into the main bit of the deanery, it's another story entirely. 2 rooms filled to the roof with boxes of stuff as yet not unpacked, not to mention the furniture. And if I spend too much time in the main bit of the deanery looking at all of the stuff, I start feeling a bit oppressed. So I beat a hasty retreat and I try to forget about the shadowy presence waiting next door against the day when we move into the main part of the deanery and all the boxes will have to be unpacked again. Did I flip it on its head? Well, if I did, it was deliberate. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be. Where your heart is, there your treasure will be. Today's gospel falls into 2 sections, and they might initially feel a bit disconnected. The first part seems to be about selling your possessions and giving alms, but the second seems to be about being prepared, ready, and waiting for the master to return. Except he seems not just to be the master returning from a wedding banquet, but troublingly he also seems to be a thief in the night. The Son of Man is both bridegroom and robber. And anyway, how does that fit into the first part of the gospel, which seems to be about selling possessions? I think the hinge section is in the first sentence. Fear not, little flock, for it's your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. So I think that what this gospel is about the kingdom. And the kingdom is a gift. The kingdom isn't something we can achieve. The kingdom isn't something we can build ourselves. The kingdom is pure gift. And the kingdom doesn't seem to be a place or an institution. The kingdom seems to feel from the gospel a bit more like a state of mind. The kingdom feels like an orientation of the will. The kingdom feels like a way of living your life. Note that the possessions that we're invited to sell are not in themselves described as wrong or evil. They're just finite. They're temporary. The furniture will get woodworm. The rugs will get moth. The clothes will fade, wear out, become unfashionable. But they're also heavy. The stuff can weigh us down. And that's part of what I feel when I go into the main part of the deanery. I feel weighed down by stuff. They can fill us with panic. What do we do about all the stuff that we've got? On one of the many trips we took to the recycling centre in Wandsworth before my partner Chris left his parish in Putney, I saw an elderly man struggling with bags and bags of I don't know what, entering one of those big self-storage places. And for a moment I felt a sort of condescending pity for him, until I remembered my own deanery, waiting with rooms packed to the ceiling with stuff that I couldn't possibly let go of, could I? And then I stopped thinking condescending, pitying thoughts. To let you into a secret, it hasn't been an existential sort of challenge uprooting our lives from London and making a completely fresh start in Suffolk, which has caused raised voices in the deanery. The raised voices have been caused by things like that sideboard which your mother gave us and which I've always hated. That's been where the crisis has happened. So, the beloved and I are invited to live the kingdom as a reorientation of our desires. I'll say that again. a reorientation of our desires. Desire in itself is not wrong. Desire is good. But it's how we orientate our desires. It's about heart and treasure. That's where the question arises. It's about how our desires weigh us down, hold us back. That's when they need to be addressed. And that's where the question about treasure and heart and treasure is so essential. Because it's about being agile. It's about being prepared and ready to live the kingdom. It's about not being weighed down. Whether it's the freight of physical possessions or the freight of attitudes and prejudices, the freight of how the past has hurt us. It's about not being weighed down. Let's be honest, most of us are aging in this congregation. And if aging feels like a process where joints stiffen and arteries harden, then a joyful invitation to us in the second half of our lives, which a few of us in this congregation are now entered into, is the invitation that as the joints stiffen and the arteries harden, our inner self is invited to become more and more agile, more and more tensile, more and more flexible, so that as we live the second half of our lives, it can be with a greater sense of gift, a greater sense of not having to cling on to or amass stuff, not having to entrench our opinions into defensive places, not having to harden our prejudices. The second half of our lives can be a place of encounter where we can keep the orientation of our desires attuned to something deeper, something more life-giving, something that is of God. Jesus asks his disciples to be girded and ready for him to arrive. But as with all the parables that Jesus tells, there is a twist in the tale. Ready not so that they can serve him when he comes back, but so they can allow the costly and painful process of the necessity of allowing him to gird his loins and serve them. Have them sit down and eat. Have him wash their feet. Have him quench their thirst. So hard to let go of your autonomy, isn't it? So hard to allow yourself to be cared for. So hard to be waited on, particularly for Christians, because we just love doing good. We love building the kingdom for ourselves, piling up good deeds, so that when he arrives, we'll be ready to show off just how worthy we are of the kingdom that he might just choose to let us into. But while we've been so busy, we failed to notice that he already gave it to us long ago, gave it to us ages ago, even before our birth. He planted the kingdom deep in our innermost recesses, our self, our true nature, who we really are, the bit of us that can gaze on God unafraid, that is attuned already to the kingdom. And the way it grows within us, the kingdom, the way it grows through us, is in the orientation of our desires, which is a lifelong process. How we discover within ourselves that deep and true place, which is the intersection point of what God desires for us and what we truly desire. That's our life's journey. The intersection of what God desires and what we desire. It might feel like we desire sex and power and money and beauty and glittery, shiny things, but the truest part of us, the deepest part of us, can be liberated into something so joyful and true when our true desires meet God's desire. So it's only about connecting. It's only about being reconciled, known and forgiven and welcomed. That's where our true desires liberate us into joy. You must sit down, said love, and taste my meat. Not because you earned it, but because you accepted it with faith green as a leaf, like aged Abraham accepting but there will be a child. There will be a future. So forgive me also a final challenging question. Because when Jesus says in today's gospel, "Fear not, little flock, for it's your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom," he's using you in the plural. It's not individualistic. So, at the moment, when you read the papers, when you watch the news, when you talk with friends about the current context of this country, does it seem to you as if we are living the deepest and most Christ-like desires in how we're talking and behaving as a country at the moment? I'm afraid I don't. I don't think we're living our best at the moment. I don't think we're living out of a sense of abundance or a sense of generosity. I think we're living out of a sense of fear and scarcity. So what can the church do about that? How can we live our lives individually and as a church with a sense of that abundant generosity that sets us free from concentrating on stuff and not having enough? In other words, how can we as individuals and as a church start to live the kingdom a bit more in our troubled times?